Hello again, whiskey friends. Thanks for coming, everybody. As of recording, we are just now in April of 2026, in what has been a very tumultuous year in the whiskey industry, filled with brands being acquired, mergers, lawsuits, closures, and lots of stories about declining sales. What makes it interesting for me, though, is that the good whiskey keeps flowing. And for whiskey enthusiasts like us, it also means the good whiskey is more accessible than it was before, with less influence of the secondary market and more bottles readily available on the shelves at MSRP. So, despite all that negativity, I thus far have had one of the most successful bourbon hunting runs in the first 3 months of the year than I can recall in the last decade. So, these are my top 5 whiskeys of 2026 thus far. So, thank you for joining today, whiskey friends. Let's kick off the show. All right. Now, to level set before we get into today's list, our lists do have certain requirements. A, it must be a bottle that I currently own and I had to buy with my own money, no media samples allowed. Second, it cannot be a hello again whiskey friends pick. Our single barrels don't count, though quite a few of them would have made this list if they could. And third, it must be a release within this particular calendar year. Any type of whiskeys could be on the list, though I am partial to American whiskeys. So let's get into the list and see what makes these bottles so special. Number 5. Leading off today's list actually might be a first for any of my top 10s, but scoring an 87 on our point system is the Reest Experimental Batch 2, which was a straight wheat whiskey, about 8 years old and 113 proof. This is produced by Ross and Squibb and was finished in tawny port, white port, Oloroso sherry, and ruby port casks. MSRP on this one was $70. Got my hands on this one in Ohio, but it does come in a 700 milliliter bottle. As you can imagine, the finishes on this thing make it an outright fruit bomb, especially considering it's a wheat whiskey to begin with. So very susceptible to those finishing casks and taking on those characteristics. But the wheat whiskey itself also has a lot to offer. Fantastic mouthfeel, great finish, adding its own elements of even some chocolate to all those fruits. So if you are feeling adventurous and you're not put off by so many finishes, this is one I would highly recommend to grab a sample of or have a chance to explore it yourself. For some, this might be a try before you buy, but I think if you took the leap on this one, you wouldn't be disappointed. Number 4. For this one, I feel like I am cheating a little bit, but I am going to give some alternatives and some ways to get into this particular mash bill if you are interested, as this will be one of the bigger pushes, I think, in the single barrel lane that you'll see across the year from various groups. But at number 4, also graded at an 87, I have the 10-year-old 100% malted rye whiskey coming from New Riff. Now, while this particular bottle was a distillery-only release that came out in 375s, what you will find more accessible throughout the year, and I'm going to put it in the same bucket as well, are going to be these releases of the 6-year malted rye whiskey, single barrels coming from different groups. This one I have in my hand is coming from the partnership between Whiskey Weather and the Bourbon Jerk. I also recently purchased one from the distillery, ordered one from Sealbox, and I know the Mash and Journey have one on the way as well. But focusing in on the 10-year version that we have here, that really gives us a good eye on how New Riff is evolving across all of their mash bills. If you recall last year, and really we're right in the middle of our tournament right now, our blind flight tournament, but I had both the 10-year rye and the 10-year bourbon from New Riff that came out last year in my top 10. This one scores a little bit below it, but I bet if New Riff took the time to do a more multi-barrel batch of the 10-year malted rye, implying they had the stocks, I bet you they could find something special. But this is a 100% malted rye whiskey. This originally came out as a 6-year bottle and bond product that has pretty good distribution around the country. And over the years, I've gotten the chance to have an 8-year high note version of it, as well as one of my specific favorites whenever they finish it in sherry. But on its own, it is delicious as well. So while the 10-year version may be out of reach until they do another blend, once again, I do recommend those 6-year single barrels. When I grab the single barrels from the distillery, they're about $69.99, and then the one I got from Sealbox was $79.99 to give you a sense on the range. The 10-year that came in at $375 was $49.99. Thus, a full bottle would have been $100. Very interesting, though, that we're kicking off today's list with a wheat whiskey and a 100% malted rye. That'll change with the next one. Number 3, scoring an 88 out of 100. This is probably one of the more obvious bottles on this list. Though if you know me, I don't tend to focus on the heritage distillers very often. But I really adore this year's batch of the 1924. Coming from Old Forester at 100 proof, I think this release has been getting better and better across the years, even to the point where I've already purchased a backup of this bottle. And I have been seeing this all over the shelf. It still might be the price that is throwing people off, typically seeing it about $120. But I see it all over Ohio. I see it all over Northern Kentucky. So while I understand that the price could be a hurdle on this one with today's market, I personally had no problems getting a backup so that I could thoroughly enjoy this bottle and share this bottle with many other people. Because while I live in a world where I am drinking cask strength whiskey all the time, not all of my guests want that. And not all bourbon drinkers want that. So having a flavorful whiskey with such a great mouthfeel sitting there at 100 proof also makes it something that I can share with a wider audience. Now, one important thing to always talk about when we're talking about 1924 is I feel like this detail gets lost. But 1924 is not the typical mash bill of Old Forester bourbon. Usual mash bill is at 72% corn, 18% rye, 10% malted barley. But on this 1924 release, the corn contents dial up. 79% corn, 11% rye, 10% malted barley. But big fan of this one. From its fudge notes, chocolate notes, tobacco notes, lots of oak and cinnamon. I think nearly anyone, as long as they can appreciate an older whiskey, is going to find something that they like about this one. So if you haven't already, I do recommend giving this one a chance. You can always try before you buy. I have seen it at restaurants as well. But I also did a comparison of this one to the birthday bourbon that I still have from 2019, and it did blow that one away. And I know there are people out there that would be willing to spend twice as much just for the bottle design of the birthday bourbon, but I think the 1924 is probably better whiskey. Number 2, another surprising one for the list here. Also coming in at an 88%, but yet another addition by a heritage distiller, and somewhat coming from a brand that I've kind of beat up in the last 2 years. But I really adore this latest batch of the Elijah Craig Barrelproof Rye, batch A126, coming in just under 12 years and at 120 proof. This is the second main release of the Barrelproof Rye, though there have been some distillery batches as well. But for me, this is heads above what I got to taste at the distillery and the sample that I got of the A925. I think what stands out for me the most is A, that level of oak coming from a near 12-year age statement, balanced with an extreme sweetness and a great level of spice. I mean, there is a lot of rich vanilla, caramel, cherry all over the front of the palate. And then as you transition into the finish, the oak adds its own layers onto there. And man, is it spicy. Heavy baking spices, good rye bite to it. And honestly, the only thing that kept this from not scoring even higher than an 88 was that I couldn't give it full marks on its mouthfeel or the length of the finish. Had it been a bit oilier, a bit creamier, or had that finish actually extended longer, we'd be talking about a score in the 90s rather than at an 88. But regardless, a score of an 88 is probably enough to keep this very, very close to top 10 status for the rest of the year. And while I've kind of said I'm not going to be buying every batch of the Elijah Craig Barrelproof bourbon, going forward, as it's really let me down now for so many consecutive batches, I did take the opportunity to jump on the rye and have no regrets about it. And it is good to see Heaven Hill really do some justice with that Elijah Craig brand that we love so much. Number one, it kind of seems strange. Number one, I didn't do a concentrated full review on this bottle. So I am going to take just a quick moment here to rapidly go through what I am experiencing and why it is my number one. So I poured a little bit of it here. Let's explore it real quickly together, and I'll kind of walk through the tasting notes in more rapid fashion than if we're doing a full-on review. But on the nose of this bourbon, I guess I'll reveal it's a bourbon, I get lots of initially dry cranberries, dried cherries, little bit of fig, so mostly in that dry fruit range, coupled with what I would call sugar, cinnamon covered walnuts. So a little bit of nuttiness there too, but some sweetness behind them. Those walnuts have also been sauteed essentially in butter. And then from there, lovely, lovely oak. This carries a 9-year age statement with it. We're going to get into the taste and the mouthfeel, but you can see what this is already doing to the glass, even with my little bit of swirling here. Up front on this one on the palate, man, that cherry that I was talking about the nose really carries through. There's also a refreshing effervescence nature about this one. Also brings across some orange to go with that cherry. So you get a little bit of depth in that fruit range right off the bat. The oak is prevalent and it also brings this nice chocolate undertones. The transition to mid-palate keeps the cherries intact and brings some delicious custard with it. And then as it swings into the finish, which is my favorite part of this whiskey, all those distinct elements come together and play this beautiful melody. The cherry, the little bit of orange, the oak, the custard, the chocolate, the baking spices, and those butter sauteed walnuts. Really is gorgeous. And the oak and the custard just continue to hang and hang and hang. So in the end, I ended up scoring this one a 91 out of 100, which means it's going to be a bottle that I continue to talk about the rest of the year. And it was a bottle I was talking about last year as well. But yet again, I guess I'm just going to be a mark on this one. I have another batch of Dietrich's Fine Whiskey. This one is batch 15, coming in at 117.8 proof. This one was distilled in December of 2016 and bottled in January of 2026. For those not familiar, if you haven't seen our prior discussions about this whiskey, this is a 5-grain bourbon containing corn, oats, rye, wheat, and malted barley. I haven't been able to see the exact proportions of those different grains. And it is coming out of Belle of Dayton in Dayton, Ohio. Now, the name Dietrich's Fine Whiskey does come from a pre-prohibition brand that was distilled in Dayton, Ohio as well. So this is also a revival of that heritage. And this is now going to be a continuing story with me when it comes to Belle of Dayton releases, as I continue to buy each and everything I can get my hands on, particularly when it comes to the cast strength releases of either their rye or their bourbon. But thus far, since I have been a hound on this, I have scored everything from them between an 88 and a 91. This one being my favorite of all the bottles that I've gotten my hands on thus far, which to this point is now up to 8. MSRP on these is a little high, $97. And while I am getting my hands on these due to my location in Ohio, as they distribute through the OHLQ system, I did also just purchase a single barrel of Dietrich's Fine Whiskey from Sealbox. And while I can't comment on that single barrel quite yet, that is an indicator for anyone watching this video of how they can get this, especially if they are in other states. It does seem like they are hitting a sweet spot with these age statements and how they're releasing the whiskey right now. So what do you think of 2026 thus far? What have been your favorite pours of the year to date? Which of these bottles have you tried? What did you think of them? And which of these bottles will you give a chance now that you've seen it on this list? Curious to have the discussion in the comments. And just remember, while you can always find more whiskey, you can never have enough whiskey, friends. So take care of those around you, and we will catch you on the next one. Goodbye, everybody.